All right, so it says, page 1, you can compare functions by looking at their slope. Slope measures the steepness of a line. Do you agree with that? Slope is the steepness of a line. Slope is the steepness of a line. And there are two ways, two formulas that we use to find slope. So if we look back in our table of contents and I go to slope, right? Counting slope from a graph, slope from 2 points, slope from a table, slope intercept form. These pages are going to be really important to us. Okay? So slope, if I go to page 31, the first page of slope, it says slope measures the steepness of a line. Do you agree?
Right.
Yeah. Slope measures the steepness of a line. And my first way of finding slope is rise over run. Good. My first way of finding slope is rise over run. Hopefully that jogged your memory. Is there another way to find slope? Another formula to find slope?
Y equals mx plus b.
That's another y equals mx plus b. What's the slope in that equation? So that's my slope. So if I had an equation, right? Slope is the steepness of a line. I've got rise over run. I've got y equals mx plus b. Is there another one?
Oh, yeah.
What?
X2 minus X1 and over Y2 minus Y1.
Flip it. Y2 minus Y1, because which direction does the Y go in a graph? Up and down vertically, which is rise, over run. X is sideways, right? Left to right. Is this coming back a little bit? So we're going today we're going to be finding the slope.
Can I have a blue sheet?
Go get one from the supplies cabinet. Today we're going to have to find slope. So we're going to have to use that prior knowledge of figuring out what the slope is. But on top of figuring out the slope, we're going to compare it. We're going to talk about which one's bigger, which one's smaller, which slope is greater. Slope is also sometimes called the rate of change. The larger the slope, the bigger the rate of change. So the smaller the slope, the smaller rate of change, right? Which one's greater? 0 is greater than 5. Do you agree? So 0 has the larger rate of change. So it's really easy when they're numbers that we deal with every day, right? It's really easy. Like I understand 0 and -5, but sometimes it's a little bit harder. Sometimes we have these fractions, and what we need to do in order to make a comparison is change to decimals. Sometimes having them in decimals makes it easier for my brain to understand which one's bigger, which one's smaller, what the greater rate of change or the lesser rate of change would be. And remember, first semester we did a whole bunch of work changing fractions to decimals.
Like that?
So you have two choices. You can either do numerator divided by denominator. 3 divided by 4. Oops, 3 divided by 4.
0.75.
So 0.75. Or you can type the fraction in 5 over 3, right?
And then click this
And then click your conversion button.
arrow button thing.
So 5 over 3 is 1.6 repeating. Yes? So which one of those is greater?
1.6.
1.6 is greater than 0.75. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So 5/3 has the greater, I'm running out of change, rate of change. 5/3 has a greater rate of change than 3/4. So we're comparing slopes. We're comparing which one's bigger, which one's smaller. So there are four types of four types of situations that we might be encountering today. We could either be looking at a graph, we could have 2 points, we could have an equation, or we could have a table. Slope from a graph. What formula do we use from slope from a graph? Rise over run. So let's write that in that box. If you have a slope from a graph, it's going to be rise over run. What does that mean? How do I find slope from a graph? I know it's rise over run, but what does rise over run mean? Where do I start? Where do I
X value
go?
and Y value.
What does it look like? So turn back to page 31. Was that it? 31, slope from a graph. Go back to page 31, slope from a graph.
How do you measure those?
And let's look up. What are my directions from slope from a graph?
Start at the bottom dot.
Start at the bottom dot. Count up until even with the top dot. Turn the corner. Count over to the top dot. If I go to the right, it's positive. The left is negative. And that's my fraction, right? Rise over run. Do you remember this? Sometimes you might have to put in some dots of your own. It's okay.
Where it connects with.
Where it
Line.
crosses those roads, right? So there's one example of a dot you could use.
Right there.
Here's another one. Yes?
Yelling too big.
You could also pick this guy. It doesn't matter. Any dots will do as long as they're dots, right? Don't pick right there, because that's not in the intersection of the axes, right? Of the grid lines. All right, so I'm going to start at the bottom dot and count up until I'm even with the top dot. I turn the corner and I count over. So that means I went up 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4. So my slope is 1/4. Now, that's my slope. My slope is 1/4. But if I'm comparing, it might be easier to have it as a what? Decimal. Can you change 1/4 to a decimal? 1 divided by 4, 0.25. Yes? Okay. My slope is always a fraction. That's what it needs to be. But sometimes I need it in the decimal form because decimals are easier for my brain to understand. Slope from 2 points. What formula do we use for slope from 2 points?
Y minus Y and X minus.
Perfect. I'm going to use y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. What does that mean? y2 minus y1. What does that mean? Zaya, what does it mean?
Okay, so when you're given like 2 ordered pairs, you
Uh-huh.
the y2 is like the y from the second order pair, and y1 is the y from the first order pair, and so
Perfect. y2 means the y value from the second ordered pair. y1 means the y value from the first ordered pair. So Zaya, given these two ordered pairs, what's the y value from the second ordered pair?
that would be
9. Minus y1, what's the y value from the first ordered pair?
10.5.
Perfect, 7.5. Over, what's my x2? Minus, what's my x1? 5. Is this coming back? Calculators out and ready. What's 9 minus 7.5? 1.5. Over. 6 minus 5 is 1. All right. So let's, because we're going to slope, let's get a decimal value and let's get a fraction value. So decimal value, 1.5 divided by 1 is 1.5. And can I convert this to a fraction? Press my conversion button. 3/2. If I was going to graph it, I would use 3/2, correct? Up 3/2. But if I'm comparing it, I want to talk about the decimal. In an equation, equations, y equals mx plus b. M is the slope. How could you describe where m is located in the equation? How could you describe where m, which represents slope,
2.
where is it located in the equation, Patrick?
After the equals 1 before the x.
It's before the x. What's that called? What's that vocabulary word for the number in front of a variable? Coefficient. It's the coefficient of x. So in that equation, y equals 2/5 x plus 9. What's the slope? 2/5. Beautiful. If I was going to graph it, I would use rise over run, 2/5. But if I'm comparing it, I want a decimal. Can you convert 2/5 to a decimal? How do you convert it? With a calculator. What's 2 divided by 5? 0.4. Beautiful.
I need to look when you put it in the same place.
From a table. Let's look back. From a table. Slope from a table. Slope from a table. Page 33. Slope from a table. Find the change in y. Find the change in x. Change in y over change in x. All right, so let's see. I did the change in y. What do you do to y? What do you do to x? Okay, here we go. What do you do to -5 to get -11? What? -6. What do you do to -11 to get -17? What do you do to 5 to get 7? +2. And what do you do to 7 to get 9? Perfect. It's the change in y over the change in x. Delta means change. So what was my change in y down here? -6. Over, what was my change in x? 2. What's -6 over 2? -3. That's my slope. Do you agree? How could you graph -3? Rise over run.
Change into
-6/2 or 6.
Yeah.
-2.
Okay, so you could go down 6 and forward 2. What else could you do?
-6 over -2.
You could go up 6 and backwards 2. Okay. Could you do -3 over 1?
And then do
Perfect. Can you make this, because I remember I had my fractions, which are beautiful to graph with. I want to compare it though. Which one I need it as a decimal? So what's -3 as a decimal?
3. -3.
Just -3, right?
Yeah.
Which one's the smallest?
0.25.
-3 is the smallest. What would come next? What's the next smallest?
0.25.
0.25. Then what comes?
0.4.
And then,
1.5.
do you see how you could put them in order from least to greatest?
Yeah.
All right, so let's now talk in words of a story problem. Ty sells signs in a monthly craft fair, and he can make 7 signs in 2 hours. His friend Harrison helps him make signs. A table shows the rate of sign making for Harrison. Who makes signs at a faster rate? Faster would be the bigger slope, correct? All right, so let's figure it out for Ty, and let's figure out Harrison. What's Ty's rate?
7 hours every 2 hours. 7 signs every 2 hours.
7 signs every 2 hours. That's what it tells us. So Ty's slope is 7/2, yes? 7 signs in 2 hours. Oh, but I have to compare them, right? And when I compare them, is it easier to compare fractions or easier to compare decimals? So can you change 7/2 to a decimal? 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Now I'm going to look at Harrison, correct? And Harrison's data is displayed in a table, yes? Let's go back to our table example. What did I do? Oh, I found the change in y over the change in x. What do I do to 0 to 15? Plus 15. What do I do to 15 to 30? What do I do to 30 to 45? So, what do I do to 0 to 4?
4.
Add 4. 4 to 8?
4.
8 to 12? So what's Harrison's slope?
15 over 4.
15 what over 4 what?
15 signs over 4 hours.
Perfect. And, I don't know. Okay, should I change it to a decimal?
Yes.
What's 15 divided by 4? 3.75. Who's faster? Harrison. 3 is the same, but then I have 0.5 and 0.7. 0.7 is faster. Harrison is a faster sign maker. After 12 hours, what's the difference in the number of signs each friend has made? So let's figure out. Ty and Harrison sit down for 12 hours. How many signs has Ty made in 7 hours? How many signs has Harrison made in 7 hours? Ooh, it's easy for Harrison. Look. In 12 hours, how many signs did Harrison make? 45. Can you figure out how many signs Ty made? How?
7, 12.
So in 2 hours, he made 7. So if I double that, 4 hours, he made 14, right? And then in 6 hours, can I add 7 each time?
21 signs for 6
42.
hours.
Or could I go 7 signs? Oops. Signs in 2 hours. And 12 hours down here. Could you make a proportion? What's 12 times 7 divided by 2? What is it? 42. Sorry.